Hello everyone, welcome to this very important discussion or presentation. I'm delighted to welcome Emma Short from Bailey's Horse Feeds, and Emma's going to be presenting on the challenging topic of feeding horses with the top line development in mind, because there's been a lot of topics about top line going around on social media, but I haven't seen any topics about feeding the top line. So I'm really excited about this. So I will hand straight over to Emma to begin her presentation with, sorry, I've also got another. No, I think they'll be along in a moment. To begin her presentation with an intro to her own background and to Bailey's Horse Feeds. So Emma is the senior nutritionist at Bailey's Horse Feeds, and we will be joined by Jane Buchan. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. And Jane is the marketing manager. So we're really lucky to have two people from Bailey's tonight, senior staff members from Bailey's, to talk to us about nutrition and the equine top line and musculature. So ask questions, put your questions in the comments section, and I will stop at intervals to ask them. So anyone that knows me knows that my area, so I'm halfway through a PhD focusing on the rider, but my other area of expertise is exercising and rehabilitation of the horse. So I'm all about muscles and exercise and that sort of thing. Okay, so I will start and hand over to Jane. Oh, no, sorry, I'm handing over to Emma, and we'll just wait for Jane to come along.
Thanks
shortly.
so much, Caroline. That's really kind of you. Hello, I'm Emma. I'm a nutritionist at Bailey's Horse Feeds and have been with Bailey's now for over 20 years. So I suppose our roles are quite varied. We would go out onto yards and visit clients and obviously assess horses, along with professionals such as yourself. So we quite like to have a collaborative approach whereby we're with saddlers, we're with vets and farriers, etc., so that we can do, give the clients and give the horses the best possible advice. We also I do a lot of webinars and a lot of training, and we are very dedicated in promoting education at Bailey's and training around nutrition, so that we can educate professionals such as yourselves, as well as obviously our customers and our clients, so that they know best how to feed their horses, and also how, as a professional, we can best advise our clients as well. And as I'm sure you know, there are a myriad of different products and supplements on the market, and it's our job, hopefully, to inform people on how best to use those products correctly and how they can support their horses moving forwards. So we're going to examine the difference really this evening between sort of fat and muscle, how both may be a reflection on our horse's diet, and how a horse's diet can be adjusted to achieve appropriate condition and obviously muscle. Oh, didn't think it was going to work then, but it's done. Excellent. So before we can make any dietary, I know it's always a little bit of a. So before we can make any dietary recommendations to our clients, we really need to establish many factors that can actually influence our advice. So the first thing that we would look to find out is whether there are any health implications, any clinical issues that we need to be aware of. Reproductive status is obviously quite important. Age, so have we got an animal that is young, still growing and developing, or do we have an animal that's maybe a lot older and therefore may not be able to utilize the feed sufficiently, and therefore is having issue with retaining muscle or developing muscle. Temperament, to some extent, obviously will certainly come into play. So what energy sources we may need to incorporate into the diet to support them. And workload, obviously, and energy requirements are a big deal. So are they at rest or in light levels of work? And as workload increases, obviously the requirements for nutrients and energy are also increasing. So we need to make adjustments there. For me, the one thing that is really crucial with being able to change and manipulate the diet is actually knowing what their current diet is and also their management regime. Without knowing what their current diet is, we don't know how many calories, how much energy, or how many nutrients is being supplied by their current diet, and how that's affecting the animals' weight, body weight, and also body condition, and obviously muscle development. So knowing how many calories or nutrients your horse needs is a good starting point, and assessing sort of their weight, but more importantly, actually body condition is certainly the first place to begin. So body weight is really useful for me for calculating nutrient requirements, but really it's of little use in assessing the current physical status of an animal. So you can look at things like weight taping, which is not particularly accurate. It is good for monitoring changes and is certainly more accessible to most people. If you're lucky enough to have access to something like a weigh bridge, obviously that's a much more accurate way of looking at weight, but it doesn't tell us whether that horse is overweight or fat. It doesn't tell us whether that horse is underweight or how muscled it is. It just purely gives us a body weight. So it's great for me doing some sort of calculations and some sums, but actually it doesn't really tell me the physical status of the horse. So we really like to look at body condition scoring in this instance, because this is a much more visual and hands-on method. We can evaluate muscle, we can evaluate body fat, and therefore we can make decisions on whether we need to alter the diet or exercise regime. So the body stores excess dietary calories as fat, and dietary protein supplies amino acids, which are the building blocks for muscle and other body tissues. And assessing the amount of fat the horse is carrying can give us a good indication of how well its calorie requirements are being met. So whether we need to alter, the energy, the calorie intake of its current diet, whether we need to increase it or whether we need to potentially lower it in order to reduce weight. Assessing the top line and also muscle also gives us an indication actually of the protein content of the diet. So too little or protein of insufficient quality can mean that the muscle and body tissues remain underdeveloped. And although we cannot change the horse's genetic makeup through diet, we can help to optimize what genetics it's got available. So diet and feeding can really help to support our horses correctly. So how does condition scoring works? Well, basically we evaluate the amount of fat covering areas of the neck, the withers, down the back, over the ribs and behind the shoulders. And body condition scores commonly use scoring systems ranging from either the 0 to 5, which is the UK system, or we have the 1 to 9 system, which has been adapted from Henneke. So this gives us a much greater flexibility and much more detail for our score. So we do tend to use the 1 to 9 system, just purely because we feel it's more accurate, and it's also peer reviewed. So that means that lots of researchers have looked into the research and have all agreed that this research paper is good. So when you're looking at the body condition score here, you can see that a body condition score of 1 would indicate that a horse has got no fat stores and it's emaciated. A condition score of 9 is the complete opposite and is extremely fat and obese. So with the 1 to 9 system, ideally you're looking at a body condition score of an ideal of around 5. So regular evaluation allows for feeding and exercise regimes to be adjusted appropriately. And it also gives you and your clients an immediate indication of the current physical state, obviously, of our animals. So it gives your customers and also yourselves a goal in order to achieve. And we can obviously manipulate sort of diet and obviously feeding, etc., to get that ideal body condition score. So body condition scoring needs to be hands-on, so the evaluator can distinguish between both fat and muscle. You can't really tell just by looking at an animal. You do need to be hands-on. And we would look at evaluating and scoring certain parts, obviously, of the body, so looking at the neck, wither, behind the shoulder, over the back, the ribs, hindquarters, on the tail head. And we would look at taking the average score and then obviously giving that overall score, that overall body condition score. So the skeleton should not be visible, but it should be easily felt. So when you're running your hands, say, along the torso, you want to be able to feel the ribs, for example. You certainly don't want to be digging in, trying to find a rib. And equally, I don't really want to see a great deal of the skeleton there. So it shouldn't be visible, but I should be able to feel it very easily. Generally, the horse should have a rounded appearance. And I've drawn on my slide here, I've drawn some lines here, and you can see there's the horizontal line that sort of, you've got the belly, if you like, sort of sitting underneath.
Sorry, Emma.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Emma,
sorry, Caroline.
No, sorry. Have you got a pointer there for your screen?
I don't know.
If you right click.
Oh, I have. Here we go. There we go.
Thank
Can
you
you see that or not? I don't know. I can't.
Which part of the screen is it on?
Yeah, if you can't, I don't know how we
move it. Oh, yes, there we go. Lovely. Thank you.
I'm just on the wrong screen, so there we go. Happy days. Oh, it's disappeared again. Right, let's try.
No,
you can see that.
Yeah.
So this is the horizontal line that I was talking about. So you will not get fat deposited in this area. So quite often what we find is when people are speaking to us, they will be telling us or saying to us, well, my horse is fat, it's got a fat belly. Well, it's probably not. What we are looking for when a horse is fat is we're looking for things like cresty necks. We're looking for fat pads, for example. And actually the belly doesn't actually hold fat in that area. So what can quite often be the case is that the horse can have a distended tummy or abdomen, generally due to possibly them being out on a lot of grass. So it could be a lot of gas sitting in the gut, for example. So you get that sort of distended sort of grass belly appearance. Or you could have forage that's maybe a little bit indigestible and therefore sitting in the gut for long lengths of time. And again, you get that distended sort of look. So quite often people confuse this sort of distended abdomen or sort of fat tummy as the horse being fat. So you can actually still have this. So you can still have that sort of that fat tummy or distended abdomen even when you have a horse that's underweight. And this is again accentuated further when the horse is not carrying enough muscle or top line. They don't have the structure there to hold themselves up properly, and it does accentuate that area. So actually establishing muscle and top line can really help, obviously not only with strength, but also with the overall visual appearance of the animal. So I have some slides here just to show you, and I'm sure you've all come across certain sort of examples of this in your line of work as well. So this chap here has a body condition score of an 8 or a 9, so he's obese. You can see obviously that he has a noticeable thickening of the neck. There's a lot of fat there. The withers are filled. The shoulder again is sort of filled in and flush with the body. It's going to be very difficult to be able to fill the ribs in this instance. And you can actually see even with the picture that you can see that he's got patchy fat sort of appearing over his ribs. He's got a positive crease down his back. This chap's going to be very difficult, obviously, to be able to fit your saddle correctly. And obviously he, at a body condition score of 8 or 9, certainly needs to lose weight. He is not healthy at this weight. On the flip side, this chap here has a body condition score of 3. So the neck, the withers and the shoulder are obviously accentuated. There's slight fat over the ribs, but the ribs are easily visible. There's fat around the vertebrae, but it still peaks. You've got a sort of a negative crease there. The tail head is prominent. The hip bones appear rounded, but again, are still visible. This guy is also a body condition score of 3, although it's a little bit more tricky and it's a little bit hazy, this picture. He's being used and competed at, a high level. So he has no reserves, and he certainly has no muscle. So it's going to be very difficult for him to be able to recover and withstand the pressure of competition without either injury to himself or potentially, his rider. This horse, on the other hand, actually has a body condition score of 5. So body weight is actually acceptable. However, there is very little muscle, there's very little top line in this particular creature. Whereas if we look at this slide here, this chap has, again, the same body condition score of 5, but he's much better developed. So his neck and shoulder obviously blend smoothly into the body. His withers are well rounded, ribs are not visible, but can easily be felt. It's back to level. There's no positive crease or negative crease, and he's got well-rounded hindquarters. So a much better specimen with a good body condition score.
Can I just take you back to the very fit horse?
Yeah.
The slide with the very fit horse.
So that one. That chap?
Yes.
Is that what you're looking at?
Yes, it certainly is. What do I want to ask you? We would expect this horse in a lot of work. I'm not sure what he is, possibly eventer, perhaps?
Yeah, I expect so.
Okay. I can tell by the stripes. But we would expect a lot of top line on a very fit horse. And yet we are looking for some sort of what you call higher condition score. So isn't a fit horse in high condition?
No, so you can still have a fit horse that's still underweight. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, these types of animals are maybe not fed correctly. They may be fed the wrong type of diet for their level of work quite often. Maybe because they don't need quite as much energy, potentially, depending on their temperaments, etc. So we would still expect this horse to have a body condition score of maybe between 4 and 5. Body condition score of 3 is too low. He won't have any reserves. And actually, what you'll find is because he is, and you can see that he's deficient in obviously energy or calories, energy and calories being the same thing, he will probably struggle to actually develop muscle because he's actually energy deficient, if that makes sense. But we'll come on to that in some slides in a moment, but it is all interlinking. So although we may be looking at maybe protein specifically for muscle development, actually, if you haven't got the energy in adequate levels within the diet, he will actually struggle to build that muscle and top line that we're looking for.
So would you say then that we can expect to see the horses that score highly in their results, so let's say those in the top 10 at a high level event, those would be in better condition in the body than those at the lower ranking levels?
I'd love to say yes. However, it's not always that straightforward, and obviously there are other factors at play. Obviously you've got genetics, you've got rider ability, you've got saddle fit, for example. All of those things obviously will have they're big factors obviously to how well he will do. However, what you will find is that you won't have as much bounce back with that horse if he's underweight, for example, and not at a good body condition. So he may not bounce back as quickly and recover as one that is. He may be more prone to injury, for example, as well. And actually, you've also got to look at longevity as well. Is he actually going to be able to do and compete at top of his game for as long as he's able, than a horse that obviously is fed ideally correctly? So yeah, I'd love to say that's the case, Caroline, but I'm not sure I can.
Well, a lot of them are dressage features very highly, or dressage scores features highly in eventing. But yeah, okay, so yeah, thank you.
Can I just say this horse was or is a typical example of quite a big framed horse, that they're trying to get fit for eventing, and we see this quite often. Less so now, where there is more warm blood in event horses, and they're quite big frames, and riders are trying to keep them as sleek as they can, trying to almost fit them into a thoroughbred mould, and that's where they then are getting it deficient with the diet. And I think this horse actually, ironically, did do quite well, but as Emma says, the longevity and the recovery is where potentially it might fall down. But
right, thank you.
Yeah.
That's just giving the audience a bit more to think about.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, I'm going to squiz through to my next slides. Okay, so we talked about body condition scoring. We also look at top-line assessment, and this looks at the overall muscle development of the horses for all ages. And the horse's top line and muscle from the neck over the withers and back to the hip and stifle area is assessed. So we look at muscle assessment as well as body condition when we are looking and analysing at our horses. And I'm sure you are also doing the same thing when you're out saddle fitting. So a top line assessment of sort of a good to excellent indicates that a horse's diet is supplying sufficient or optimum levels of quality protein, whilst an assessment of maybe adequate to poor indicates that the diet is supplying insufficient levels of quality protein to meet minimum requirements. So what we're looking for is we want to ensure that the horse's dietary protein requirements are met at all times, so that it can help to maintain top line and muscle tone, even through lighter levels of work or through layoff periods. So it's super important that we're maintaining that quality throughout different workloads or periods of rest. And actually our work with the Futuratory young horse evaluations highlights that. So even in horses who are not in any form of ridden work at all, we will see better top line and muscle in those receiving a balanced diet with the correct levels of quality protein coming through, and it will be lacking where the diet is deficient. So obviously we know that exercise is absolutely crucial. However, even in those horses that aren't doing anything, we do see an improved top line and muscle development. And this assessment is important because it gives us an idea of where the horse deposits fat, where it builds muscle, maybe where their management and maybe their exercise regime maybe need tweaking. And it helps us to identify sort of areas where that horse may require weight gain, it may require weight loss, or where it needs more top line and muscle development. And it allows us then to adjust sort of feeding and exercise programs a little bit more sort of specifically, and also helps to monitor, be consistent in both feeding and also their management regimes, because if their horses are putting weight on, their body condition score is increasing, we can then look at reducing calorie intake, but still maintaining that quality protein and vitamins and minerals, so still maintaining that balanced diet, which is what we're looking for, and vice versa. If we need more calories or whichever way around we need to go. So having that assessment, not only for us as professionals but also for our clients, is a really good way of monitoring and keeping things as consistent as we can. So how do we achieve sort of a good body weight and musculature along with exercise? We basically need to feed a balanced diet, and this should provide all the nutrients the horse needs according to their specific requirements for workload, for their life stage, and also reproductive status. And it should maintain an appropriate body condition, as we've discussed. It should support healthy hoof growth, correct muscle tone and development, and also correct gut health. And this is typically achieved by feeding the recommended amount of a compound feed, so mixed cube or blend or balancer, or possibly supplement according to body weight and workload, ideally alongside average quality forage. So I wanted to discuss forage because this can be quite an important factor to the diet. And really, we should be building from the forage base sort of upwards. So we should be choosing feeds or supplements to complement our forage quality that we have available to us, to then create a balanced diet. And our analysis, we do a lot of forage analysis, and it showed that a lot of modern pastures and forages are lacking, particularly in minerals as well as vitamins, and also often protein. So some form of dietary supplementation, whether through the bucket feed, is necessary, even for those horses that are really good doers, even for those that hold their weight on fresh air. But the biggest complication is sort of forage contributions. So feed and or supplements are only fed in very small amounts in comparison to the amount of forage that we feed. But it's the total contribution of forage and bucket feed that determines whether the horse's diet is balanced. And obviously the forage makes up the biggest proportion, so it makes sense that that can have a big impact on how well balanced our horses' diets are. So compound feeds, so cubes, mixes, balancers, are all designed to be fed against what we call average quality forage. And the nutrient quality of the forage will affect those feeding rates. So if a forage has a poor nutritional value, then the quantity, so the amount of concentrate feed that you may need will be greater, but also vice versa. So if you've got a fantastic forage that's really digestible, very high nutrients, very high energy, for example, then actually you might be able to feed slightly less. So the quality of the forage will affect our feeding recommendations and your feeding recommendations. And it's really important from a practical point of view that if you are going onto a yard and you are faced with your customer and they seem to be feeding correctly for workload, for body weight, etc., but the horse is still not maybe maintaining enough muscle, still maybe not thriving and just not looking as you would expect it to on its current diet, actually you've got to ask the question why. And quite often it can be down to the forage. So quite often people perceive their forage to be sort of constant or consistent, but actually it varies hugely and can change. So maybe they've changed their batch, maybe they're on a different bale and it's come from a different paddock, a different supplier, and they haven't realised, and actually that can have a big impact on how well that diet is supplying the nutrients to that horse and how balanced it is.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to flip back before I move.
From me. First of all, there is a comment from the audience. Hello, everyone. I work in the racehorse industry in Japan. Nice talking. And my question is, what the trend seems to be now compared with 30 years ago is that horses are being put in the UK into taped paddocks which really are only exercise areas. They don't seem to be managed for nutrition. They're more for keeping horses safe from each other. And it's a very small area. It's potentially overgrazed, or so it's not the same as putting a horse in a herd in several acres, or 1 acre per horse, for example, which was the old guideline. So it seems clear to me that those horses are in, or should have, a nutritionist involved, that you can't just nip along to the feed store and order what you think might be right, but they almost need to be considered that they have no forage of much value, so that they can then get their nutrition from their proprietary feed. So what would you say about when to call the nutritionist?
Well, at any step, it doesn't matter when. If you've got a question and you're not certain about anything, then give us a call. That's what we're here for, is to advise with forage, to advise with bucket feed, to advise with overall sort of condition, weight, muscle. So at any stage, if you're not sure that you're doing the right thing, regardless of whether the horse is at rest or in hard levels of work, you know, that's what we're here for. But I would completely agree with those comments. Absolutely. I suppose what is the difference there is whether they are getting supplementary forage with hay or haylage, which they most likely are.
Yeah.
And actually your compound feeds will be, they're designed to be fed alongside that average quality forage. So they should pick up any shortfalls if they're fed correctly, alongside your hays and haylages. I will move on actually, Karen, because that does quite nicely move on to my next slides.
Okay.
Actually, it might answer some of the questions as well as we go through. But we do a lot of analysis, including grass as well as hay or haylage, if we have specific issues, particularly from a clinical point of view, or if there is issues with performance, etc. as well, because the forage absolutely is, you know, is crucial in providing that balance. And actually what we find is that the minerals in particular, things like your copper and zinc, for all ages of horses, for all levels of workload and reproductive stages, the copper and zinc levels will not be adequate within grass. So we expect grass to provide, and it generally does, provide more nutrients per se than our hays or haylages. But you also have obviously an impact with hay and haylage with that as well. So again, hay and haylage will also not provide adequate levels of copper or zinc. The horses are only getting 45% of their daily zinc requirements and only 30% of their daily copper requirements. And that's based on the minimum amounts that they should be getting, so not the optimum amounts. So you can imagine if we're not even meeting minimum requirements on just a forage-based diet, then, you know, they are going to be deficient. And this comes in again, this is sort of leading on from a little bit from that question that we were talking about, sort of taped paddocks. So we've also got to think about the protein, obviously protein being key for muscle development. And you can see in this graph here the relationship between the fiber content of the grass in this instance and also the protein content of the pasture. So as the grass matures, it becomes more fibrous, and the protein content will reduce. So when something's more fibrous, it's generally not as digestible for the horse. So you've got sort of a double whammy, I suppose, if you like, here, in the fact that you've got a more fibrous plant material that the horse can't digest as easily, but also the protein level is also low. And you've also got the fact that it's not as digestible, it's probably not able to utilize the available protein also. So you can see here that in July, typically, and this will vary, but this is just as an average, July typically will have the lowest protein value within our grass pastures, and the fibre is at its highest. So if those horses are obviously turned out with no additional supplementation, whether that be with additional hay or haylage, or whether any buckets or supplementary feeding alongside those, alongside the forage, then you can see that actually it's probably going to be also deficient in protein, actually. So the digestibility of the forage is a big issue, because if you have a forage that's not digestible, then actually it's going to be sitting in the gut for longer. We were talking about gut fill earlier. It will sit in the hind gut for potentially up to 3 days. In some instances, it's very indigestible. And the horse cannot utilize it particularly well. So this can have obviously an impact on the balance of the diet. It can have, you know, and this is obviously reflected in muscle tone, hoof and coat quality, and sort of general sort of overall condition in the horse. And this is again also reflected with sort of your hays and haylages. So we had a look at sort of looking at the grass, hay and haylage, and looking at the crude protein, which is the total protein content of the forage. What I would like to say is that we're not looking at the quality protein here. So we're not actually looking at the amino acid profile. We're just looking at the total protein. It doesn't tell me how good quality the protein is actually. And you can see here, and unsurprisingly, obviously the grass typically has a higher protein content of an average of around 80 18%. But actually the range can vary from sort of 6 to 30% with your grasses, depending on time of year. So protein typically being higher in spring, that initial sort of growing period, and then as you saw in the graph previously, it then declines. And hays and haylages are, once they're cut, obviously, you know, that the protein will pretty much stay as it is, so it's not variable, but depending on where it's been cut and when it's been cut will obviously dictate what it's supplying. So on average, we find that average hay is providing a protein of about 7%. And haylage is around 8.5%. So you can see that the haylage is very slightly higher than the hay. However, this is not an indication, so it doesn't actually tell you absolutely that your haylage will always have better levels of protein or nutrients. It's very much dependent on the individual batch of forage that you are feeding, and there are so many different factors that can affect nutrients intake, sort of nutrient levels, so protein levels, and how digestible that forage is. So the digestibility is really key. You can have maybe a forage that maybe has a higher protein content, and actually on the base of it looks pretty good. But if it's not digestible and you've got very high levels of fibre within it, then actually the horse actually may not be able to utilise it as efficiently. So forage is really key. And analysis is not always the right thing. It's not always the right way to go. It gives you an idea. It's not specific because you're taking a very small sample and you may have a complete barn full of, you know, of your hay or haylage, for example. Particularly with grass, you know, it varies all the time, so it gives you almost a little bit of a snapshot in time. And if you are changing your forage frequently, there is absolutely no point in you looking at analysing it. But as I say, in specific issues, if we have a case where it looks like that animal should be getting everything that it needs and it should be thriving and it's not, then actually the forage is certainly something that we would look at.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Just going back to zinc and that other mineral, what are they for?
Right. Okay. So
why does the horse need 100%?
Yeah, absolutely. So they need lots. It's not just obviously copper and zinc. Yeah. It's minerals in general, essentially, but your copper and zinc specifically are involved in a number of essential roles, so including sort of growth and connective tissue health. So it's really important with things like cartilage, for example.
Yeah.
It's important for enzyme function, iron metabolism, particularly with copper. So if you have issues with, say, anemia, for example, it's quite often due to the fact that there's insufficient copper in the diet and actually not the iron, because the copper is important for iron sort of mobilization, if you like. So it has a lot of important roles, things like the nervous system, for example, as well. So it's not just one thing. And they're all interlinked. So all your minerals are interlinked across the board. So it's difficult to say, right, okay, well, we just need to supplement, say, with copper, for example, because that can actually have implications on how the zinc is absorbed, for example, in the diet, and also has other implications to other minerals as well. So I will bang on about it. It's all about that balance. You do need to have a balance of all of your minerals together. Vitamins, obviously, protein, energy, etc., to make sure that the horse can achieve what you're wanting it to correctly and in the best possible way.
Okay, thank you. One other very quick question. It probably hasn't got a quick answer, but your standard chubby pony, and I go to owners and they say, but I don't feed him and he just looks at a piece of grass and he's fat. How can they be overweight with clearly almost nothing to eat, or almost not enough to eat? What is that? And is it that I know that human beings can become, have a high fat content in their body if they're stressed? So it leads me to think, well, wouldn't a horse be stressed looking at all the lovely grass around it and being in a taped paddock with nothing on the ground except maybe
Yeah.
a bit of hay. And what's going on there?
Absolutely. I mean, stress certainly, certainly play a part in it. If you think about how we diet, so if you suddenly just decide that you are going to lose weight and you're just not going to eat, you're going to starve yourself and just have, a carrot stick a day, your body will not be able to function on that. So it kind of almost goes into sort of a shutdown sort of process, if you like. So it will not be able, and it will not be burning fat. So you won't actually lose weight by doing that. Whereas if you actually eat correctly, and you are actually eating the correct levels of your vitamins and minerals, your protein, etc., and you're eating a balanced diet that is low energy, low calorie, then your body is able to metabolize and function correctly. It can then burn fat correctly through the right exercise. So it's as basic as that, really, in that the body just goes into shutdown. And don't forget that even though those ponies, for example, may look like they're not getting anything, if they're out even on a bald paddock, there will be something there. So, very short grass. So we're out in starvation paddocks, will have very high levels of sugar generally. So it is a matter of sort of making sure that you're putting the right type of forage in, that you're giving them adequate levels of forage to support them. But don't forget that fibre will provide, depending on what hay, haylage or grass they have available to them, it will provide quite a lot of calories. So it's making sure that you're feeding the right type of fibre that's low in calories, that is maybe more indigestible, so that they actually they're not maybe digesting it as efficiently, so they're not getting as many calories or as much energy from it so they're not becoming fat, but actually then you're backing it up with an appropriate diet. And I will come on to that in a moment, but to make sure that they're obviously getting the right balance of vitamins, minerals and protein, because that body will almost go down into that shutdown process, and then losing weight, as we know from our own experiences, is not as easy.
Okay. And also I find that if I was on a diet and sat on the couch all day munching Rivita, I'm not going to get my top line from that, am I? I would need possibly.
Definitely not. Absolutely. No, it's not giving you the right nutrients. It's not giving you the quality nutrients that you need. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for
and quality. Exercise. How important
is
exercise?
Absolutely. 100%. Your diet and exercise go 100% hand in hand. It's not just about diet. You do have to put the effort in from an exercise point of view as well. So not only to burn calories.
The figure of 8 system. It seems to me that if you're going to attempt to restrict calories, it's a good idea to put this figure of 8 system in, because the horse is moving around and at least they're metabolizing, not standing there in a small paddock. So
exactly.
I mean, you may have a slide about that, but I just would like to know at some point, how does that fit in? Diet, exercise, fat.
It fits in hand. Without the exercise, you can't burn the fat. There's only so much that we can do from a dietary point of view, and when you're looking at a horse specifically, it's slightly more complicated in that they have to have a certain amount of fibre in their diet in order to maintain correct gut health. Otherwise, you are going to be dealing with clinical implications such as your ulcers and colic, for example. So you absolutely do need to. There's only so much that you can do from a dietary perspective. You do need to put the work in and the exercise in and have movement, so they're burning calories as well as from a dietary point of view reducing it. As we know, you can only burn fat and lose weight if you're not putting as much energy in. If there's more energy going in than you're actually using or burning, you're going to put weight on. So that exercise is absolutely crucial in getting both aspects from a muscle and a calorie point of view.
Great, thank you.
You're very welcome. So how do you actually know whether that diet is balanced? Well, you don't really until you start asking more questions. The questions are really key. So I would look at asking my customers and clients more questions. So, is the feed that they're feeding suitable for their horse's workload, age, reproductive status? Are they feeding the recommended amounts? How much forage are they feeding? Kind of goes back to your question there, sort of, Caroline, and how much forage is that horse got access to? What's the quality of the forage that they have access to? And if they are out on those paddocks, how long are they out for? What does the grass look like? What's the season? Are we talking about spring, summer, autumn, winter? So all of those factors will have quite a big impact on how we decide. But also, sort of, feeding management is a really interesting one as well. So if they're only maybe going down, or maybe only able to feed sort of maybe say once a day, for example, that's going to very much limit what you're able to feed to those horses in order to maintain that balanced diet, because the digestive system is designed to receive feed in very limited amounts. So you can't feed large bucket feeds, particularly of concentrate feed. So we do have to be a little bit careful that we don't upset that balance. So these are all more questions that I want to know, and what I need to consider. So is that horse on a restrictive, on a restricted forage diet? So is he overweight? If he's on a restricted forage diet, maybe he's not getting enough nutrients from that diet. Maybe the protein isn't quite high enough. Is that forage being soaked? So soaking forage, particularly for long lengths of time, over 8 hours, will potentially remove both minerals and proteins. If you've got a forage also that's maybe not particularly great from a quality point of view and is quite high in indigestible fibre and low in nutrients, and you're soaking it also for long lengths of time in order to reduce calorie intake or sugar intake, then actually the nutrient levels may also be too low. Is there enough forage being fed? And that goes back again to that same question. We need to be looking at maintaining our horses with a minimum of 1.5% of their body weight as fibre or forage per day. And that's on a dry matter basis. So that's once all the water has been removed. So that's how we calculate it. From a fresh weight point of view of how you're stuffing your hay and haylage nets, you actually need to be feeding more than that. So, but it's 1.5% body weight minimum per day. So that's the minimum that we're looking at. So we need to do some sums and make sure that our horses are actually getting the right amount of fibre. And also making sure that they're feeding correctly. So a product, whether it's a supplement, whether it's a feed, they're designed to be fed at a certain level in order to do their job effectively. So if they're not being fed correctly, then actually the diet is probably not balanced. So it could be just as easy as maybe just tweaking and adjusting the diet initially to potentially resolve the problem and balance the diet out if something's not being fed correctly. If it's not being fed correctly, maybe because it's providing too much energy or maybe too many calories or the wrong type of energy, then it might be the wrong product that they're feeding, might be the wrong feed or supplement that they're putting in, so that you might need to look at changing that to something that's more suitable. And if the diet does appear to be correct, but you're still finding that those horses are still not thriving, then that's when we need to maybe look and evaluate the diet in more depth. So looking at the forage, for example. Equally looking at sort of obviously health implications. So, you might need to get the vet involved also. Can that horse utilise the feed efficiently? Are there issues there that maybe we need to address also from a clinical point of view? So let's have a look at muscling up and what else obviously we need to consider when more muscle development is required. And it is about getting the right nutritional building blocks because they are essential in building that muscle and that top line that we're looking for. And as I say, your top line in your muscle is evident in those that are receiving a balanced diet and lacking where the diet is deficient. But as we've almost said in some of the questions here, you won't achieve a well-muscled horse without the correct work and without the correct training. So they work hand in hand together. We can supply the right dietary components, but actually if that horse isn't being worked correctly or for long enough, then he's going to struggle to develop the right muscles and obviously maintain them. So the essential nutrients that we look at is typically protein. So it's the main component of muscle and body tissue. And it's supplied in limited amounts by our forage. So the amount of indigestible fibre within our forage sources will affect how well the horse digests and therefore absorbs the available protein. So as we've said in some of the previous slides, sort of time of year, the grass species that are available in the paddocks with their hays or haylage will affect the protein content of the forage, and it's not consistent. So you might find that forage may provide adequate crude protein or total protein for those horses in light work, but it may not actually supply the right amino acids, so essentially amino acids, the quality protein. And particularly if you've got a horse obviously in harder levels of work, they have much greater demands for protein to build and also repair muscle. So again, their requirements for these essential amino acids are even greater. So the quality of protein is really crucial for me, actually more so than looking at the total or crude protein. This is really what counts, because it's the quality that's determined by the individual amino acids of which it's made up. So amino acids that are absorbed from the diet will be essentially joined to make new proteins that the body needs. And these are then used by the horse for muscle development, but also other essential proteins are used for sort of hair, hoof growth, as well as sort of enzymes and hormones. And with the right dietary components, the horse's body can manufacture most amino acids, but there are a small number which we call essential, which I'm sure you've come across, essential amino acids such as the likes of lysine and methionine, which have to be included within the horse's diet. They cannot manufacture them. If one of the amino acids needed is present maybe in a smaller quantity than is required, then actually your protein synthesis, so how the horse manufactures proteins, can be adversely affected. And we know that the amino acid that's most lacking in our horse's diet is lysine. So you've probably heard of that. Maybe on social media, I think it's been mentioned recently. So it's really important that we ensure that there are adequate levels within the diet. It's really important that we're giving our horses enough. And a lower lysine intake that's maybe deficient could actually negatively impact muscle development and growth. And this is why we actually add additional lysine into most commercial feeds or supplements. So we add additional sources of lysine to ensure that any shortfalls within the forage portion of the diet can be counteracted. So forage typically doesn't actually provide a huge amount of lysine. So you might find that the diet actually is supplying enough crude protein or total protein to meet our horse's requirements. But actually, if the lysine is not there in adequate levels, then actually the horse is still actually sort of protein deficient, if you like, and still will struggle to build that muscle and that top line that we're looking for. So feeding, yes, no, I thought you probably would. I'm going to flip back. I should have just been quiet.
This is challenging. I did say, you could breathe, and I'll dive in there. Right. What was I going to ask?
Sorry.
It's nearly gone, but I daren't let you go. I was going to. No, it's gone. Sorry, I've got left my found my pen. That's okay. So I carry on, and I will come back. Well, what I need to say is that you told me you had 40 slides, and it is an hour into this massively fascinating topic. So now that we've come on to protein, and I remember my question, but now you seem to be getting into the nitty gritty. But I think I need to split this talk up at when you decide at a good time for us to split it. But more and more horses, and especially the economic climate at the moment, more and more horses are probably spending more time out. So maybe those who've got the opportunity to use more grass in the horse's diet are probably doing so. Can you, all right, maybe this is too broad a question, but for people who are looking to compete horses off grass, so this probably comes back to the track system, but is it realistic to give the horse maximum grazing and still be able to compete them? I know it depends on the discipline, but what can you say about forage and
you can have
energy.
a horse that's out on grass, absolutely, and as long as you're feeding it correctly. I suppose the biggest issue that you might have with grass, well, there's two main issues, is that obviously it fluctuates a lot more than obviously hay or haylage, but on the flip side to that, it does generally give you more nutrients as well. So you just need to be aware of what the grass is ideally providing. And absolutely, as long as you're supplementing the grass correctly with the right supplement, because your grass alone will still not provide a balanced diet, it will not provide the right minerals, and particularly for those horses in moderate to hard levels of work, it will not have adequate levels of your lysines, your essential amino acids.
Okay.
So you need to put additional supplementation into the diet. If your horse is maintaining weight absolutely fine out in the paddock because the grass is providing, adequate levels of energy or calories, then something like a balancer is where we would look to go here to make sure that the nutrients are being met without the calories.
Okay.
It does depend. There is no sort of hard and fast answer depending on the individual, but the main thing is that you're supplementing and counteracting your shortfalls within your forage, regardless of whether it's grass, hay or haylage. So you can absolutely compete as long as you're balancing it correctly.
Okay.
So we'll move on to supplementing. I don't know how I'm going to split this, Caroline, because it kind of interlinks, but I'll see. I mean, I don't know how that's going to
15 minutes.
Yeah, you can try. If I can get through the slides, obviously it will be quick.
Oh, okay.
Quicker,
it's just that
okay, let's see how it goes.
No questions at the moment, but I think the audience may well have some after they've taken all this in. So I'll let you continue. Let's see how we're doing in another 15 minutes, shall we?
Okay.
Thank you.
So you can that's okay. Supplementing the diet. So you're feeding to build muscle, however, doesn't mean that we need to feed excessive amounts of protein, and actually over supplementing a horse's diet could encourage excessive drinking as the horse tries to and attempts to get rid of any excess protein, which is not ideal, and that can obviously put more strain on things like the kidneys and liver, and also they're drinking more typically, so they will generally urinate more, which means that you've got more mucking out, which becomes harder. So quality forage generally fed alongside the right concentrate feed should be more than adequate at providing the essential amino acids required for the average horse. So good quality feeds that contain amino acids in appropriate amounts and proportions, provided they are fed according to manufacturer's guidelines. So as long as you're feeding a product designed for workload and you're feeding it for your horse's body weight, then you should be able to support the right levels of amino acids. And there are some protein sources that are better than others. So actually looking at the ingredients within a product and the feed is a really good idea. So look for ingredients such as things like soya, for example. The lysine content within your soybean is 3%. Alfalfa also has reasonable lysine levels at around 0.75%. Sunflower, surprisingly, has a lysine of 1.2, and linseed a little lower at 0.8. So those kinds of ingredients on your feed levels are, a good thing to look out for, because they will help build and maintain, obviously, that muscle and top line. However, I mean, a good compound feed or balancer fed at the recommended quantities is far more sort of cost effective than obviously adding lots of expensive sort of bodybuilding sort of supplements to a diet that's maybe inadequate. So it's really key that you keep things simple, that you actually get the base diet correct before you start popping on lots of sort of, supplements and that kind of thing. Is get the base diet right, make sure that it's providing good quality sources of essential amino acids, and you should be halfway there. And it is all about the balance. So you need to ensure that the product that you're feeding is suitable for obviously that age, that reproductive status, workload, and it's fed at the right amount for body weight. Energy cannot be turned directly into muscle, but if the horse is using more energy than he's receiving from the diet, then he will not be able to generate new protein or muscle. So, you do need to make sure that the horse has got adequate levels of energy or calories in the diet. If you have an animal that's maybe got a poorer body condition score, maybe we were looking at that body condition score of 3, for example, then actually you may need to look at a product or a feed that has high levels of energy or calories. Things like a conditioning feed, for example, will have not only good levels of essential amino acids, but also energy and calories, so that you're supporting weight and also able to generate new protein for muscle development. And obviously consider forage quality. That's super important. You might find that forage is supplying adequate levels of energy or calories for your horse, so they're maintaining a good weight. They may have adequate levels of energy for the work you're doing, but what's the nutritional content? What's the protein level? How available are these nutrients to the horse's diet? So you may need to adjust the concentrate diet accordingly, and particularly for those that maybe don't thrive on just on mainly a forage based diet, then we will need to sort of tweak the bucket feed. So for those that do hold weight very well and require a low calorie or low energy diet, then your balances are ideal. They're designed specifically to provide a concentrated source of that quality protein, so the essential amino acids, such as your lysine, along with your vitamins and minerals, but they keep your energy and your calories extremely low. You do, however, need to make sure that you're feeding them correctly, and also that they are suitable for workload. So don't forget that as your horse's workload increases, their requirements for nutrients and energy also increase. If you were feeding a cube, mix or blend, you would typically increase the volume that you are feeding in order to support those harder levels of work. So the same is true with a balancer. They're typically fed at around 100 grams per 100 kilos of body weight. However, if you're in more moderate to harder levels of work, then typically you'll need to be feeding more than that in order to make sure that the diet is fully balanced. And for those that need more energy or more calories, so maybe have a lower body condition score, then you can choose a mix, a cube, a blend, specific for workload and obviously for body weight. You may need to look at something with a higher energy or calorie content. So again, a conditioning type product in order to provide enough energy or calories as well as the right nutrients. Make sure that they are being fed at the right amount for workload and body weight, because if they are fed under where they should be, then actually the diet will not be balanced. So they're designed to be fed at a certain amount. And if they aren't being fed, then maybe the product isn't quite right. Or what you can do is you can top up with a balancer. So a balancer can be used alongside reduced amounts of a cube or blend or mix in order to make sure that the diet is still fully balanced with respect to your amino acids, your quality protein and your vitamins and minerals, without necessarily increasing the calorie or the energy content. And if you're feeding straight, such as oats, for example, again, they will not supply the quality protein, the amino acids, the vitamins and minerals. So again, top up with the right balancer for workload in order to get that right balance. Now, you may also need to be counteracting some of your forage shortfalls. So even when you're feeding your compound feeds at the right level for body weight and workload, if your forage is particularly of poor quality and not very digestible, sometimes you actually need to feed a little bit more of it. So what you might find is that you might have to increase the amount of hard feed or bucket feed that you're feeding in order to compensate for that. Or what we can do is we may top up with, again, a balancer to support the vitamins, protein and minerals. Or what we also do, if we're meeting vitamin and mineral content with our bucket feed, but actually the quality protein is still not quite where we need it to be, then actually we would look at introducing quality fiber sources that provide protein also, so such as alfalfa, for example. We would use that a lot alongside of the bucket feeds and the forage in order to provide, again, more lysine, more amino acids, without actually upsetting the vitamin and mineral balance of the diet. So that can be a really useful tool to get the protein into the diet. Supplements, are they necessary? Well, actually, if the diet is balanced and it's correct for, again, age, reproductive status, workload, body weight, and forage quality, then you probably don't need them. However, I would recommend things like electrolytes for those horses that are working sufficiently hard to sweat, digestive enhancers to ensure correct gut health, and maybe some oil or oil supplements if you do need additional energy in a more concentrated format, or you have clinical concerns where you need to keep the starch levels low. And that does bring me onto this slide, which I think is quite an important aspect from a muscle point of view. So there are lots of supplements that are recommended to use in addition to the main bucket feed in order to maybe boost muscle development and Topline. And actually what I would like to do initially is, before we go straight down the supplement route, is actually to assess and look at the base diet, because actually it's quite often that just not feeding correctly. So here what I've looked at is sort of 4 different aspects. So we've got the muscle supplement, which you're feeding obviously small amounts as you do with the supplement at about 50 grams. This is based for a 500 kilo horse. You can see that the crude protein in total in that 50 grams will give you 10.8, and the lysine is 0.57 grams. If you were to look at something like a balancer, I've used our performance balancer in this instance, and you're feeding just 2 mugs, so 500 grams, you would actually get 130 grams of protein and 11 grams of lysine. Looking at the alfalfa, so half a kilo, which is typically about 1 of the round stub scoops, you have 15% crude protein and 0.75% lysine here, which will give you 75 grams of protein and 3.75 grams of lysine. And you can see with your grass hay, actually, protein is significantly higher, obviously, because they're feeding much larger quantities at 7.5 kilos. So you can see the differences here. And what we're aiming for is to make sure that we are complementing the forage and that the base ration is correct. And actually, you possibly don't need lots of expensive supplements on top of your base feed, as long as you're feeding it correctly and you know what your forage is supplying. That brings us on to some take-home messages. This might be maybe a good time to maybe end, possibly. I don't know, Caroline, we've got some case studies after, but take-home messages. So forage alone may, in sort of some instances, supply adequate levels of protein, but it will be low in that essential amino acid lysine. So just be aware of that. Your forage will fluctuate throughout the season, so it's not consistent. So you will need some form of supplementation, bucket feed, concentrate feed there, to make sure that you have got enough of these components in the diet. You need to ensure that the bucket feed is correct for body weight workload. And I keep banging on about that, but so often they're not fed correctly. And there's a reason why we put recommendations on the back of the bag. So you do need to feed them at the recommended amounts, because it's against average quality forage. Obviously, if your forage is very different and we've looked at it, then we may vary it, but typically from experience, it's not. And if muscle and condition is still poor, then the diet may need to be evaluated in more detail. So maybe we do need to look at more forage analysis. Maybe we do need to get the vet sort of involved. And it's not just about protein, although protein is key and those essential amino acids are key for muscle building. It's really important, obviously, the horse has enough energy in order to, to support protein synthesis, and that it's got the right components with the vitamins and minerals as well, because that can have a real impact on how energy is metabolized and how everything works together. So it is all about that balance. It is really key. It's not just about one nutrient or another. What did you want to do, Karen? I've got a couple of slides on. I think I'm on slide 37. So we could go through the case study, or we can leave that to another time.
I would like to save the case studies, because I think that would really spark our audience into lots of questions. At the moment, I think they're mesmerised and very quiet. So I would just like to summarize what I've been hearing that this is all about. Is that the first consideration, if you consider that your horse's top line is a bit poor, is that you must ensure they have a balanced diet, and so that the horse has the muscle building elements, so that you can't just chuck it in there, if you like, and hope for a top line.
Hope for the best.
And too much protein strains the kidney. So you could, if you don't get this right, you're going to strain other organs potentially and get a soggy, stable floor.
Yes.
So is that where we're at with this? We really have to get a balanced diet. We can't just supplement. Yeah, so I'll let you answer that question, and then I have another quick question.
Brilliant. No, the balance is absolutely crucial, and it's not about just shoving more of one nutrient in, such as your protein, in order to establish that muscle that you're looking for. It's about getting the right protein in, so looking at your lysine specifically, and making sure that you're meeting our optimum levels. Because actually, what you don't want to do is, although a deficiency is not ideal and you're not going to get anywhere from a deficiency point of view, actually feeding excessive levels is almost as bad. So it is about getting those optimum levels of the right protein and making sure that you have got adequate levels of energy. And every horse, from an energy point of view, energy is one of those things that is quite variable, as I'm sure you can imagine, that it depends on how well that horse thrives, how, what the forage portion is like. So every animal potentially will have slightly differing levels of energy or calorie requirements depending on breed and how well they maintain their weight or not. So that's why things like body condition scoring is important, because you want them to be that ideal, that moderate condition score, so that you know that they have got adequate levels of energy or calories coming into the diet. And actually, if they haven't and they're below that, then actually they're not getting enough. But equally, if they're over, that has obviously implications with exercise, as I'm sure you know, and how well they can work and develop muscle.
So it's not about going to clinics where you just get the right exercise that builds top line and use the right muscles without the nutrition being there to support that. You're really not going to get the result that you possibly could.
No, absolutely. You just may not be reaching your animal's genetic potential. You may get somewhere with it, but you may not be getting, where he could possibly be.
Yes. Okay. And probably in a shorter amount of time as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. I'm going to ask you about creatine, because I know that.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
Oh, no, I don't, I'm not into biochemistry or anything, but it used to be like a quick fix muscle developer. Do you know if it's an amino acid? Is it one of those amino acids that you've been referring to, but that I've just picked out as something as I know to be a muscle builder?
Oh, crikey, Carol, you've stumped me there, because I can't
let's
remember.
Do that next week. Maybe it's
the top of my head.
No, it's probably only featured like from my knowledge of 20 years ago of nutrition. You might have moved on beyond that. So let's save that for next time.
Okay.
Because I know there were a couple of products on the market which said, feed this because it's got creatine in it.
There were,
and it will build muscle. So, if that's changed, fine. But I was just thinking about that. Well, look, there's no more questions, and I'm really looking forward to the case studies. So if we could set a date to go through the case studies, and then if anyone's got any questions, they could ask them then. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. That's fine.
So we'll talk about another date, and also there's a lot to talk about, but we'll go from the case studies, and then from there we can talk about what is a normal, a typical problem now is my horse has too much energy, or my competition horse, if I feed it, he gets a bit, loses his brains, or can't focus. So we've got those sort of cases perhaps as well. So so at the moment, let's wait for the case studies on building top line so that we get a better understanding. And this also relates to saddle fitting, so that when the saddle fitter is taking a history of a new horse, and they say, for example, oh, we've just moved yards, then the fitter can think, I know the right questions to ask here, or I know to make a recommendation about seeing or consulting a nutritionist. So fascinating stuff. Thanks a million, Emma. It's been really brilliant. There's loads of detail there to go over again and fill in some gaps. And
you're very welcome.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jane. And we'll reconvene another time.
Okay.
Thank
Fantastic.
you.
I'm going to stop sharing my. Take care. Bye-bye.
Oh,
what's going on there?